the four phase would be the fans. Cannot play winning football without you. I have seen a day when it's tough playing outside at our NRG Stadium. And it's our responsibility to bring the fans back and get them excited about the product we're going to put on the football field. And I guarantee you we can do that.
That was Lovie Smith just a few days ago after officially taking the reins as head coach of your Houston Texans. Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again into the Fox 26 Sports Stream. As always, I'm Sal Manine, sports producer here at Fox 26. We appreciate you joining us as we do every Monday just after 7 o'clock. You can find us on our YouTube channel. Just search Fox 26 Houston in YouTube to find us. You can go on our Facebook page, on Twitter, and of course on our website, fox26houston.com. We'll be delving a bit more into Lovie Smith's introductory news conference as the Texans head coach, what he said, why you can feel a little bit of excitement if you're a Texans fan, and anticipation now that the offseason is officially here, a critical offseason. And did the Super Bowl last night possibly shed any light on things that Lovie Smith and Nick Caserio and everybody running the Texans might want to look to try to replicate the success of the two teams who were able to play for the Vince Lombardi Trophy last night? We'll also get into the Rockets as they are getting set to take the court in less than an hour out in Salt Lake City. First of a 3-game road trip, final 3 games before the All-Star break this weekend. Of course, Houston will be represented by 3 players who are not All-Stars, but who will be taking part in the Rising Stars Challenge. And then Jalen Green will be a participant in the dunk contest. So we'll get into where the Rockets stand, especially in the wake of the trade deadline, in which there was a lot of talk going in about what might Houston do, what should Houston do, and they end up making only one minor trade. So we'll hear from GM RAFAEL Stone, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the UH men's basketball team for the first time in almost 5 years, coming off back-to-back losses. Both games went down to the wire, and certainly no shame with where the Cougars, what they've been able to do this season, and losing on the road to a tough SMU team, and then losing a close one at home to Penny Hardaway and a Memphis squad that is loaded with talent, even if perhaps their win-loss record this season didn't always show that. So let's start with what happened last week is Lovie Smith was officially unveiled as the new head coach of the Houston Texans, of course, taking over after just 1 year for David Culley. And you hear people talk all the time about you want to win the press conference, win the news conference, and very rarely do you come out and say that a guy did not do that whenever a team brings in a new head coach, general manager, something like that. But if you're a Texans fan, you certainly feel good about the things that Lovie Smith had to say. And we heard just in that open right there, his direct appeal to the fans, not just laying out how important it is for the fans, but also saying it's up to he and Nick Caserio and everybody at the Texans coaching staff to re-earn the trust of the Texans fans. And if you're a Texans fan, that's something you want to hear after what you've had to endure, not just the last 2 seasons, which have both produced only 4 wins each, but really over the last several years with the myriad of issues and problems that have crept up with how the team is run, moves they made, moves they didn't make, just who was actually steering the ship. It's very easy if you're a fan of the Texans to be sitting there and scratching your head and going, what's the game plan? What are you getting at? Why should I give you the benefit of the doubt, especially now when you're in the midst of a rebuild? And that's something that Lovie Smith looked to directly address. He said all the right things. We're going to play tough, hard-nosed football. We're going to run the ball. We're going to be physical. We're going to have takeaways. Our defense is going to look to score just like they're our offense. Those are all the things that you want your head coach to say. And it is a stark contrast to a year ago when we went through this whole charade here in Houston with David Culley, who was a first-time head coach, and I think a lot of people believe was really there as almost the puppet for people above him to pull the strings, that you could tell this was a new guy who had not yet sat in that big chair before and had to answer all the questions from not just the media, but also the fans, as far as what are you going to bring? Why is things going to be different? And you can tell that Lovie Smith at least has some experience in that regard. So he said all the right things, and now it's a matter of how does he actually go out and implement that. And we started to see that as he's built his staff up, starting with the two names that we definitely know for the coordinated positions that were announced, along with Lovie Smith's hiring Frank Ross, staying on as special teams coordinator, Pep Hamilton being elevated from QB's coach and passing game coordinator to the outright offensive coordinator. And Lovie admits that that was a big sticking point for him, was not only being able to have Pep Hamilton, a guy with whom he has experience, but somebody who proved over the last month of the season he was able to do some positive things with rookie quarterback Davis Mills. And that's why Lovie is excited for what the potential could be with Pep Hamilton continuing to work with Davis Mills.
It was a must, as I see it. One of the first things, of course, that I did right away, Pep, we need you. But we have a relationship too. And Pep Hamilton had a lot of opportunities to go a lot of different places. You talk about, the question was asked, can you get it done here? Why here? Because we've been around here. And we kind of see exactly what we can do. But Pep has an expertise. As you look at his background with what he did in San Diego with Herbert to, of course, what he did with Davis here. He's a fundamental coach that has a defensive mentality on toughness with the running game and all of those things. And I'm excited about him being on our staff and seeing exactly what, and our Houston fans will be on what he's going to do.
So again, Lovie's saying all the right things, and it certainly looks a lot better on paper to have Pep Hamilton as your offensive coordinator, when a few weeks ago, if you're a Texans fan, you're wondering just what might this look like, as Pep Hamilton was interviewing for jobs with other NFL teams, and you're staring at the prospect of Josh McCown, who's never been a head coach before, possibly being the new head coach. And now, at least again, you're able to avert that situation. And while Lovie Smith may not be as sexy a hire as some of the other names that are out there, if you're a Texans fan at this point, you have to feel better about not having Josh McCown and having Lovie Smith than having to see how that all played out. Now, that's what everybody reading between the lines seems to think was going to happen prior to the Brian Flores lawsuit. And we should point out that yesterday, NBC Sports' Mike Florio from ProFootballTalk.com said that a source has told him that Brian Flores' lawyers will amend their lawsuit and they will name the Texans as a defendant, saying that they passed over Flores for the head coaching job in retaliation for him filing his racial discrimination suit against the NFL. And so the Texans will join the Broncos, the Giants, and the Dolphins as teams specifically named as defendants in his lawsuit. General Manager Nick Caserio was asked about just that. What role did Brian Flores and his lawsuit have to play in the decision they ultimately arrived at? Here was Nick Caserio's response.
This process is pretty fluid, right? And you have to take information in, but I would say there were conversations with Brian after that took place, so that really didn't affect the process at all. A lot of it was me taking information, processing a lot of information, talking to various different people and different parties and different candidates, and ultimately arriving at an endpoint that I felt made the most sense for our organization, and that's what we did.
So that was a whole lot of words without actually getting into any real insight. And so, look, that's the line that the Texans are going to take, and that I'm sure if they do end up being named as defendants in the lawsuit, their lawyers will argue something similar. But from an outside perspective, it's hard not to think that the Brian Flores lawsuit is not the reason that Lovie Smith, who up until days before being officially named the head coach, we had never heard any inklings that he was being considered, that he was a candidate. The Texans were telling everybody who they interviewed, they themselves, this was not leaked through the media or somebody's agent. The team themselves were saying, We've interviewed this person. We've interviewed this person. We've had a second interview with this person. They could have done that with Lovie Smith at any point in time, who, again, is a known commodity. And it wasn't until after Brian Flores filed the lawsuit, after their finalists came down to Flores, Jonathan Gannon from the Philadelphia Eagles, and Josh McCown, who they have this love affair with for one reason or another, that all of a sudden Lovie Smith is in there as a candidate. So that was the position from GM Nick Caserio, and we'll have to see how it plays out with regards to Flores and his lawsuit. Now, speaking of Josh McCown, we did get the chance to sit down with Lovie Smith after he was able to have his introductory news conference, and we asked him just that about Josh McCown, his prospects as a coach in the future, and possibly joining Lovie Smith's staff, whether it's this season or somewhere down the road. Remember, Lovie Smith has been the coach with Josh McCown in his QB room several times over, several years in Chicago where Josh McCown was a backup and at one point even got thrown into the starter's role for a significant period of time when Jay Cutler got hurt. And then when Lovie Smith took over in Tampa Bay with the Buccaneers, he again had Josh McCown as one of his quarterbacks. Here's what Lovie Smith had to say about the prospects of Coach McCown one day or another.
Had a special relationship with Josh. Thought he was outstanding. When you're a quarterback of a team, you have a certain role, especially a veteran quarterback like Josh had for us in Chicago. And then when I got a chance to go to Tampa, one of the first guys I wanted to come with me was Josh, based on what he's going to bring to a locker room. I thought he would be an excellent coach. So to answer your question, anytime, any team that could get Josh on their staff is going to be in better shape. So would I want Josh to be on my staff eventually someday? Absolutely. You know, Josh is, working through some different, there's different times in your life when you want to do certain things, but yes, our sport's going to be better when Josh is a coach in it.
So there's yet another person who, again, does collect a paycheck from the Texans who says nothing but great things about Josh McCown. And look, everybody around the league always says nothing but nice things about Josh McCown, the person, and the way that he approached things when he was a player in the league for almost 2 decades. But what I still don't understand, if this guy is supposed to be the next big thing in coaching, why has he not become a coach at any level other than volunteering at high school and helping out with his son's high school teams? If he is going to be the next Bill Belichick or Bill Walsh or Bill Parcells or Mike Tomlin or Pete Carroll, go on down the list of anybody, why is Josh McCown not taking some type of job, especially if it sounds like not just Lovie Smith, but again, other people around the league say, I can see a future coach in there one day. The way he approached things as a backup quarterback, the fact that he was in the QB room so often and under so many schemes. If everybody says this, then just go take some type of coaching job. And then if in a few years you want to do this song and dance about Josh McCown is going to somehow revolutionize NFL football, then at least you have something on which to go. But this love affair that the Texans, more so than anyone else, seems to have with Josh McCown being the head coach causes you to scratch your head. And again, nothing about how the Texans have been run as an organization from a football standpoint over the last several years says they've earned that benefit of the doubt. They've earned the trust of the fan base to say, all right, if you say that this guy is head and shoulders above everybody else, or something that no one else in the football world does, that you're going to pluck a guy out of just being a player with no coaching experience and give him the keys to the franchise. Sure, you've proven with your track record that you know what you're doing. We put our full faith and trust in you. The Texans haven't earned that. And so that's why, again, I say Lovie Smith may not be as exciting a hire as some of the other candidates that are out there, but you at least dodged a bullet if you're a Texans fan with not having Josh McCown be your head coach for right now. And so we'll see how things play out. Obviously, there's a lot that they still need to figure out in the coming weeks leading up to the draft, specifically what's going on with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, there's much bigger issues off the field that has to be resolved, but if those are resolved, are they able to trade them, and what kind of trade package are they getting in return? Is it not going to be until after the draft that they have to look to move him? At this point, you're hoping to just drive up the bidding as high as possible, as now we're seeing there are multiple teams in need of a quarterback, let alone a franchise caliber quarterback in Deshaun Watson. So what can you get for him? And then if you look just to last night, you saw that there was a blueprint from the two teams who played in the Super Bowl as to how you can get to play for the Vince Lombardi Trophy, which is what the ultimate goal is for all the teams here. And one side, you had the Rams, who said, we're going all in. They expended basically all their future draft capital. They're going to have to do a lot of finagling with the salary cap and how contracts are structured and all that in order to make things work down the road. But they said, right here, right now, we have a collection of stars. We got the right coach. They were finally able to find the right quarterback. They went all in, and it worked. And it went against all the traditional thinking in the NFL that you want to build through the draft, find young guys on cheap contracts, develop them. You can't have a roster of too many stars because then you're not going to have depth. And it's really almost what the Texans were trying to do the last few years under Bill O'Brien, where they said, we're going to go all in. And they made this outlandish trade for Laramie Tunsil, giving up all this future draft capital. They said, we got Deshaun Watson still on a rookie contract, playing at a Pro Bowl level. We got stars around him like DeAndre Hopkins, J.J. Watt on defense, finally found a Pro Bowl left tackle to protect his blind side. We're going all in, and you saw that it didn't work. And really, the Rams so far are the exception, not the rule. Now, conversely, if you're a Texans fan, you can look at the Cincinnati Bengals and say, well, there's at least some reason for hope, because up until recently, that was the franchise that everybody in the league circled as the one you don't want to play for, the one you don't want to have to be associated with, the one that was cheaper than everybody else, their facilities, everything, that the way they did was so far outdated that they were far and away below the rest of the league when it came to how they run a professional football franchise in the 21st century. Yet all of a sudden, after going through coach after coach and after having some good years, Katie's own Andy Dalton took that team to the playoffs. Obviously, Carson Palmer played at a Pro Bowl caliber level and was able to have success with them. They've had good players, yet that was always considered one of the more downtrodden franchises in the NFL. They finally get the right quarterback, a generational talent in Joe Burrow, and he's able to lift everybody else up around him. And in this instance, yeah, they got hot at the right time. I'm sure if football was like basketball and you had to play a 7-game series, I'm sure if they played the Kansas City Chiefs 7 times, that the Chiefs would win 4 well before the Cincinnati Bengals do. But all it takes is that one instance where you come out on top, and whereas the Texans couldn't do it a few years ago, despite a 24-0 lead, Joe Burrow and company were able to get hot at the right time, and they were able to make a run to the Super Bowl. So if you're a Texans fan and you want to take the glass half full approach, you can say, all right, well, things look bleak now. Things look dire. Is the new head coach even the long-term solution? Is the young quarterback who looked good the last couple weeks of the season, is he even the long-term solution? All it takes is one instance where the draft chips fall your way, and maybe the Texans do get the next Joe Burrow who saves them from the hole in which they currently find themselves. Maybe it's Bryce Young from Alabama a year from now. Maybe it's somebody 2 or 3 years from now. Remember, at one point, Joe Burrow, who became the football world's darling over the last few weeks, at one point, he was the guy who was transferring from Ohio State, and then the guy who got off to a rocky start at LSU, and then all of a sudden puts it all together, has one of the greatest collegiate seasons in recent memory, if not in history, and now obviously took his team to within just a couple plays of possibly winning a Super Bowl at such a young age. So if you're a Texans fan, there's at least your reason for hope. But I realize that's asking for quite a bit there and really taking the glass half full approach. All right, I do want to shift gears, and we'll touch a little bit on the Rockets, who, as we mentioned, will be taking the court in just over half an hour against the Utah Jazz. The trade deadline came and went, and most of the Rockets are still on the roster. The one move they made was sending big man Daniel Tice back to Boston. Tice, who had basically fallen out of the rotation after the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, played in only about half the games as the Rockets changed up their lineup. Obviously, rookie Alperen Şengün proved that he was worthy of getting a lot more minutes as a rookie than maybe the Rockets thought would happen when they initially signed Daniel Tice to that free agent deal, and they didn't have Şengün on the roster then. And then even on draft night, drafting a teenager, do you know what you're getting? But all of a sudden the minutes weren't there for Tice, and so they flip him for veteran point guard, yet still relatively young, Dennis Schroeder, who it does not appear is going to be bought out. That was what a lot of people thought on draft day, but RAFAEL Stone, general manager of the Rockets, says nope, they're planning to keep Daniel Schroeder here, that he can help mentor and develop the rest of the young guards that the Rockets have. They like to play a 5-out style that necessitates having multiple options at 1, 2, 3, even 4. So it's not like keeping Schroeder, at least in terms of how the Rockets are viewing it, is going to take a lot of minutes away from the Kevin Porter Jr.'s and Jalen Greens of the world. But that was really the one move that the Rockets made. Eric Gordon, still a Rocket. Christian Wood, still a Rocket. And RAFAEL Stone was asked about that, the fact that he kept those two veterans, the two guys who most likely seemed most prime to be moved. Here's what he had to say about them remaining with Houston and the possible offers that the team entertained but ultimately decided against at the trade deadline.
Yes, we received offers. But we don't feel, we obviously didn't receive an offer that we wanted to do more than we wanted to keep the guys. And I think, I think they're important parts of this team. And I think both guys are, we have, with this group of players, we do feel as though we've seen real growth. It's been uneven, to say the least. But we do perceive there to have been real growth this year. And we think that this is, that we kind of firmly believe that we're going to see a lot of internal growth with these guys. And so, so notwithstanding the fact that we received offers, that this by no means was this a situation where these guys have multiple years left on their deals, but B, we're not trying to shake things up just to shake things up. And so the mere fact that you get an offer, even if it's a good offer, doesn't mean you necessarily do it.
And I think RAFAEL Stone kind of showed you what the Rockets were thinking at the end of that comment there. The fact that both Gordon and Christian Wood are not expiring deals, that they have multiple years left on their contract. Perhaps it's as simple as, if they weren't blown away by what a team was offering, they feel they could still move those guys in the offseason or early into next season, because yes, this is still going to be a multi-year long rebuild in the case of the Rockets. So it's not like Eric Gordon's deal was up at the end of this season, so if you don't trade him for something, you're going to lose him for nothing. That has to be the rationale there, that by all accounts they wanted at least a first-round pick for Gordon, if not multiple first-round picks in return for Christian Wood. So if you weren't getting what you wanted and what the market seemed to bear right now, you have to think that the Rockets are still believe that down the road they can flip those guys, because especially in the case of Eric Gordon, who's 33 at this point, and remember, came into the league very young, so he's got some tread on those tires. A guy like that, by the time the rebuild is actually complete for the Rockets, is Eric Gordon still going to be close to the player he is right now in 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be? And so that's why, just because they weren't moved now, I wouldn't be shocked if both, if not at least one of those guys, is moved by the Rockets come the offseason. And obviously, again, at this point, it's just a matter of stockpiling as many assets as you can. Houston still in the bottom 3 of the standings, which means they share with the other 2 teams, the Pistons and Orlando Magic, the best odds to get the number 1 overall pick. And again, it's looking like there's several different options at the top of this year's draft. And so if you're the Rockets after the All-Star break, all you want to do is keep seeing what you got from the KPJs, Jalen Greens, Alperen Şengün's, Josh Christophers, all these young guys on your roster. Let them keep developing, and then hopefully you remain low enough in the standings that you're able to end up with a high draft pick that maybe is a Paulo Banchero or a Jabari Smith, a Chet Holmgren, something like that. I mean, look at other teams that have had to do this dance with the lottery in recent years. Before the Lakers got LeBron and AD, and I realize this year has not gone how they expected it to in La La Land, but they won the title a couple years ago and have been in the mix. Before any of that happened, they were ending up with a lottery pick each and every year until finally they had enough assets that they were able to flip them into Anthony Davis and LeBron James. The Philadelphia 76ers, James Harden's new team, reuniting him with Daryl Morey. Obviously, everybody remembers trusting the process, and Sam Hinkie, former Rockets front office exec, was vilified at times for that, but it now is proven out to work. And just because you end up with 1 or even 2 or 3 lottery picks, sometimes it takes several of actually trying to scratch off that ticket and see if you finally do hit and you end up with a Joel Embiid type or a Ben Simmons, which those two had taken the Sixers deep into the playoffs before. And then when things didn't work, they were able to flip Simmons into James Harden. And we will see what that looks like after the All-Star break, because James Harden will not be playing the rest of this week as he tries to get back to full strength. So that's what's going on with the NBA. Just wanted to point out men's basketball did drop in the rankings after those back-to-back losses, down to 14th in the Associated Press top 25, 15th in the coaches poll, which we kind of talked about this a few weeks ago, that voters were going to look for a reason to drop U of H because their strength of schedule doesn't stack up with some of the other teams just because of what the American Athletic Conference is this season. And some of the teams that they played in the non-conference, who at the beginning of the year looked like a very formidable slate with Virginia and Oregon, Bama, a lot of those teams ended up not quite having the years that they typically have, which kind of drags down some of U of H's computer numbers. But as far as the eye test, UH is obviously still a tournament team, will still be a tough out. It's just a matter of this point of depth or lack thereof, because this is where it's going to start to catch up to them the deeper that this season goes. And then as they try to play into the postseason, and look no further than those last 2 games, losing at home to Memphis and losing on the road to SMU, UH starts off pretty well, is leading in both instances at the half, but then down the stretch just doesn't have the same oomph that their opponents do, because at this point they are so depleted and so shorthanded. So we'll keep our eyes on how things play out with Kelvin Sampson and his Cougars. They're back at it Thursday night at home against Central Florida. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Fox 26 Sports Stream. As always, we will have more for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9, including a critical showdown in the SWAC, a doubleheader up at Texas Southern right now, with the men and women both hosting Southern. In the case of the men, it is a battle for first place in the conference. So we will have those highlights and then some team reaction after the game. That'll most likely be on our 10 o'clock news. So be sure to join us. And as always, for all the most up-to-the-minute information and updates on everything in Houston sports, make sure you are following our sports director on Twitter. You can find him at Mark Berman, Fox 26. For all of us here at Fox 26, I'm Sal Manine. We'll see you again next week. Take care.